My name is Tessa Calder, and I was 28 the night my parents took me out to dinner to tell me I was adopted. My mother smiled while she said they had only kept me because of the benefits, and that now I wasn't useful to them anymore. My father pushed the papers across the table like he was handing over a receipt. They had already started the process to cut me out of everything. I didn't cry. I didn't speak for nearly a full minute. But there was something they didn't know. 5 months before that dinner, I had found my birth family, and that night I had them sitting 3 tables behind my mother's chair. She just hadn't turned around yet. What happened when she finally did is the reason I'm telling you this 6 years later. Welcome back to Quiet Truth Stories, where we talk about family, boundaries, and the exact moment someone stops shrinking to fit a seat they were never truly given. If you've ever had to fight just to belong at your own table, this one will hit home. And if you want more stories like this, stay with me. The restaurant was called Belmere, and I had never been inside it before. Of course, my mother chose it. That alone should have warned me, because Marlene Calder never spent money on me unless she planned to get something back. She wore the kind of dark blue jacket she only saved for church and formal meetings. My father, Graham, had made the booking under her name instead of mine, which I noticed the second the hostess asked, and he answered before I could open my mouth. No balloons, no cake, no awkward birthday song from a staff member. Just a table too neat, too quiet, too bare. For a birthday dinner, it felt less like a celebration and more like a hearing. I used to work events for other people, so I knew the difference. I'd spent years around polite rooms where money moved quietly and family members smiled through the worst news of their lives. I knew when people were waiting for the real conversation to begin. This had that same cold, careful feeling. So I did what I always do when a room starts to tighten around me. I slowed my breathing. I checked every exit without looking obvious. And that was when I noticed the little brass table number behind us and to the left, table 8. I locked it into my memory for no reason I could explain yet, just in case. Then I set my own folder down beside my glass of water. Plain, tan, nothing special. My mother glanced at it and clearly assumed it was something harmless, maybe a card or paperwork from work. She had no idea what was inside. To understand why I wasn't shocked by the way that night was going, you have to understand birthdays in my house. When I was little, my birthday meant one cupcake, not a party, not a pile of gifts, one cupcake. Usually from a convenience store on the way home, sitting out on the counter while my mother took a call and forgot about it. A single candle, if she remembered that much. Meanwhile, my cousin Nolan got catered food, a rented game truck, and half the relatives bringing presents because he was my Aunt Denise's son, and Nolan was real family. I remember one year when I was about 7, asking if I could have a party too. My aunt was drinking tea at our kitchen counter and answered for my mother before my mother could even decide how to dodge it. "Let's not be greedy," she told me, smiling like she was doing me a kindness. "We can only make one child feel special each month." That was the moment I started learning how cruelty can wear soft clothes and sound almost affectionate. I learned the math early. One cupcake cost less than a party. A child who asked for less caused less trouble. By the time I was 10, I had mostly stopped asking for anything at all. I told myself that was maturity. I told myself I was being easy to love. Really, I was just becoming convenient. And people like that don't notice they've been valued until someone finally says the number out loud. By the time I was 18, I'd left that house with 2 backpacks and a scholarship application I'd filled out myself. Nobody drove me. Nobody cried. I worked nights at a pharmacy, took classes in the morning, then transferred to a state college and finished a legal assistant program while doing shifts at a diner on the weekends. I paid for everything. I'm not saying that to sound impressive. I'm saying it because it matters later. By 28, I was working as a trust and estates paralegal in the city. I spent my days inside other people's futures, drafting the documents that decide who gets what after someone is gone. Wills, beneficiary forms, distribution schedules, trust language. The boring pages that quietly control everything. I could read those papers like most people read expressions. The funny part was this: I could explain a stranger's rights perfectly. I could tell a widow exactly what she was entitled to, but I could never seem to ask my own family to love me in a way that wasn't tied to a function. The only person I ever really called was my grandmother. Every Sunday at 5 o'clock, no matter what, I spoke with Nana June. She was the only person in that house who answered like she genuinely wanted to hear from me. She had opinions about everything and patience for very little nonsense. When I was 11 and crying in her kitchen because my cousin had told me I didn't really count as a Calder, she put down the spoon she was holding, turned to me and said, "You were brought here on purpose, darling. Don't ever confuse that with being picked up and forgotten." Then she made me toast with too much butter and let me stay up too late watching old movies. Nana died when I was 25. At her funeral, I was the one who spoke about who she was, not just what she left behind. A few weeks after that, my parents moved out of the small, split level they'd been living in and into a larger, older house on Larkspur Lane, the one tied to Nana's trust in ways I didn't understand at the time. I was still grieving, so I didn't ask many questions. But Nana had said something to me during one of our last calls that I didn't fully understand until months later. She told me, "You'll never have to beg for your own life." I thought she meant it emotionally, like a grandmother trying to make her granddaughter brave. She meant it very literally. About 5 months before that dinner, while I was looking through county records for a completely different reason, I found out why. The year before I turned 28, my family began acting strange around me. Not loud strange, quiet strange. The kind of strange that makes your stomach hurt before your brain catches up. Texts that used to come back within an hour started taking 2 or 3 days. My mother stopped looping me into holiday plans and then acted confused when I showed up with food nobody had asked me to bring. My Aunt Denise started using a word in the family group chat that she had never used before: blood. Blood only for the lake cabin. Blood only for the holiday weekend. Keeping it close this year, just blood. I understood the message just fine. I just didn't understand why it had all changed so suddenly, all at once. Families drift apart, sure, but this wasn't drifting. This felt arranged. Then one evening in April, my phone lit up with my mother's name, and her voice was warmer than it had been in over a year. "Sweetheart," she said, and she only ever used that word when she wanted something. "We'd like to take you somewhere nice for your birthday, something proper this time." Even before she finished speaking, every instinct I developed in my work started screaming the same thing. Too neat, too polished, too rehearsed. People think the cruelty is always loud. It isn't. Sometimes it shows up as a fancy reservation and a softer tone. Sometimes it shows up in cashmere and a corner table, and a mother calling it kindness because she knows how to spell the word. So I said yes, in the same sweet voice she had trained me to use. Then I hung up, sat at my kitchen table, and stayed there for a long time thinking through every detail I could connect. The change in the family chat. The house on Larkspur Lane. The weird warmth in my mother's voice. Nana's sentence. The folder already in my work bag. I didn't call back to ask questions. I didn't warn them that I'd been digging through records. I made a few calls of my own, carefully, the way you do when you've already decided not to let yourself be blindsided. I won't tell you every name I contacted right away, but I'll tell you the rule I've lived by ever since Nana taught it to me without saying it directly. When my mother gets nice, somebody is usually about to lose something. This time, I made sure it wouldn't be me. A lot of people assume this kind of story is about money, and yes, there's money in it. There's a trust, there's paperwork, there's a house, there's a signature that mattered more than they realized. But sitting in my car in the Belmere parking lot that night, hands steady on the wheel, I wasn't afraid of losing cash. I was afraid of losing the last thread of belonging I had left. Because no matter how cold that house had been, no matter how transactional every birthday and holiday had felt, it was still the only origin story I had. They were still technically my parents. And if they cut that thread the way I thought they were planning to, then I'd be exactly what my cousin had said when I was 11, not really one of them. That was the wound they were aiming for, and they knew it because they had been pressing on it my whole life. What they didn't know was that it had already started to heal. 6 months will do that when the right people finally find you. I checked my face in the mirror, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked across the lot with the calm of somebody who has already read the ending. I wasn't walking into a surprise. I was walking into a goodbye I had chosen in advance. They just didn't know it yet. We ordered drinks before anybody said anything honest. My mother talked about the wine list like she was hosting a business dinner. My father mumbled something about traffic and parking that he had already said twice in the car. Then, somewhere between the bread and the first course nobody would end up touching, Marlene folded her hands and shifted into the voice. You know the one, the polished, careful tone she used when she was about to explain why something bad was actually practical. We've always done what we could for you, she began. Graham nodded along behind her like he was being pulled by a string. We gave you a home. We gave you school, more than a lot of kids ever get. I let her keep talking. One hand rested on the folder beside my plate, and I noticed my father's eyes flick down to it and then away. The typed label showed only the top few letters from where I had tucked my thumb over it. He noticed enough to get nervous, but not enough to understand. My mother kept going about sacrifice, about gratitude, about how children should understand what it costs to raise them. I thought about that lonely cupcake. I thought about the one candle. I thought about all the times I had told myself I was being practical, when really I was just making myself smaller. Then she stopped, took a sip of her drink, set the glass down with the precision of someone stepping onto a mark she had rehearsed, and said the sentence that cracked the whole night open. There's something you should have been told a long time ago, Tessa. She looked straight at me. You were adopted. The way she said it made it sound like she was announcing a schedule change. We took you in when you were a baby, she continued. You were never biologically ours. I don't want you thinking we meant to hide it forever. She was watching for collapse. She had built the entire evening for collapse. The cashmere, the reservation, the pauses, the carefully chosen setting. She expected me to break apart in front of her so she could watch it happen. And part of me did flinch. I'd been waiting for impact without knowing the exact shape of it. But I had spent months preparing for this version of the truth, and the only thing she really revealed that night was how little she understood me. Then she leaned a little closer, her mouth curved into something I can only call satisfied, and said the line I'll probably hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. We kept you because of the benefits. She smiled when she said it. That was the part that actually made me go cold. Not the cruelty, the smile. I had been raised on cruelty. The smile told me everything I needed to know. She had not just rehearsed this, she had enjoyed rehearsing it. And right then I saw the whole shape of my childhood in a way I never had before. I hadn't been a daughter who disappointed them. I had been an asset that had stopped paying off. My father, trying to sound reasonable, tried to explain the arrangement like he was talking to a client. There were assistance payments in the beginning, he said, staring at the table instead of me. The adoption came with a small monthly subsidy when you were little. That ended years ago. There were tax advantages too, and your grandmother, well, she had expectations. He didn't say Nana's name with any warmth. He said it like it belonged in a file. He said my adoption helped them meet family expectations and that it had been worthwhile for a long time. I sat still while the entire arithmetic of my childhood rearranged itself in my head. The one cupcake. The hand-me-downs from my cousin with the store tag still attached. The way my room's heat always seemed to fail first. They hadn't been struggling. They had been collecting the difference between what a child cost and what a child brought in. I had been the income stream. "We invested in you," Graham said, as if that ended the discussion. My mother, impatient with his careful tone, cut in. "That support ran out years ago, Tessa, and now you're 28. There's nothing left in this for us." She said it like she was talking about an expired coupon. "Today, you're not useful anymore." That was the sentence. 2 lines, and they reduced my entire life to something they no longer needed. I reached for my water. My hand didn't shake. I noticed that it didn't, and that small steadiness felt almost unreal. Then my father did what he had come there to do. He reached into the leather folder he'd brought and slid a stack of papers across the tablecloth until they touched my plate. "We've already filed," he said. "You won't be included in anything. No inheritance, no future claims. We wanted to handle it properly in person." He said properly the way people say nicely when they mean efficiently. And here's the part they never understood. I knew almost immediately that they had filed against the wrong thing. I read the first page in seconds. I saw exactly what they had done. They had aimed at their own will. But the real control wasn't there. They had spent money trying to cut me out of something that barely mattered while leaving untouched the document that actually decided everything. They didn't know that. They thought the power in that room belonged to them, so they'd gone after the easiest target. I didn't correct them. You don't interrupt someone when they're making a legal mistake that benefits you. You let them finish. So I slid the paperwork back a little and left it where it was, neither accepting it nor rejecting it. Then my Aunt Denise's voice came through my mother's purse because, of course, she was listening on speaker, and of course, she had already been brought into this. "Family protects family," she said, smooth as silk and twice as sharp. "You've always understood that." I still didn't cry. I expected I might. Some younger version of me had definitely been braced for it. But 28-year-old me just took a slow sip of water and set the glass down carefully. That was when I saw something on my mother's face I'd never seen before. Disappointment. Not because I was hurt, because I wasn't performing the scene the way she had written it. She snapped, "Aren't you going to say anything?" I actually thought about that, about all the things I could say, about every birthday, every dismissal, every laugh that came at my expense, every time I had been made to feel like a guest in my own house. Then she made the mistake they all make. She filled the silence herself. "We kept you because of the benefits," she repeated, slower this time, like she thought repeating it would finally make it sting. But a sentence loses its power the second time it's spoken by the same mouth. The first time, it had been a weapon. The second time, it was just a confession, and not about me, about her. I folded my napkin into my lap and smoothed it once. Behind her, at table 8, I saw a woman with my exact chin turn her head toward our table and go very still. To explain that folder, I need to take you back 5 months. Right after Nana died, I signed up for the state reunion registry, not expecting anything. I had very low hopes. It felt like one of those things people say they'll do and never actually do. A few weeks later, a letter arrived in neat handwriting I didn't recognize. It was from a woman named Lila Hart. She wrote that she had been 20 when she gave me up, that she had thought about me every year since, and that if I ever wanted to meet her, she would come wherever I needed. No pressure, no expectations. At the bottom, beneath her name, she'd written one more line. I never stopped keeping a place for you. 3 days after that, another envelope came. This one had nothing to do with Lila, or so I thought at first. Our state had only recently opened original birth records to adult adoptees, and I had already filed the request through the same registry system. While waiting for that file, I pulled the records on Nana's trust, mostly out of habit, and partly because I never trust family stories without paper. And there it was, a trust executed before Nana died, administered through a corporate trustee, not in my parents' names, not under their control. The trust schedule said caregiver payments to Graham and Marlene Calder would stop when the beneficiary turned 28, and the remaining assets would pass to me, not their estate, mine, held by a trustee they couldn't touch. And the date lined up with the dinner invitation so perfectly it felt almost cruel in its neatness. They had chosen my birthday because they knew something was ending. They just didn't know what. 2 envelopes in 1 week. One told me where I came from. The other told me exactly why my parents were rushing. I didn't call them to scream. That's not how I operate, and it's definitely not how I survive. I've seen too many ugly family fights get turned into evidence later. So, I used process. I took a day off, went to an attorney I didn't know, and paid her myself to confirm what I already suspected. The caregiver distributions were real, still active, and scheduled to end. The monthly money my parents had been living on for years was tied to Nana's trust, not their will. On my 28th birthday, the remainder was set to transfer to me through the trustee. No signatures from them required. They couldn't undo it. Their little disownment had been staged on the wrong document. I asked the attorney not to call them. I didn't want warning. I didn't want a softened version. I wanted 3 things in a folder. The retainer letter, so they'd know I had counsel. The trust schedule, so they'd see the ending in black and white. And my original birth certificate, so the whole table would know exactly where I came from. I kept that folder in my work bag for 5 months, like a match waiting to be struck. The invitation to Belmere just told me when to light it. I met Lila for the first time at a small diner halfway between our cities because she didn't want me to travel too far on our first meeting. That tiny kindness nearly knocked me over. She was nervous. She kept opening a worn photo album and closing it again before I could see inside. She had my chin. She had my stillness when I got overwhelmed. It was unsettling and comforting at the same time. Over the next 5 months, we built something slowly, carefully, like people fixing a bridge they still needed to stand on. I learned I had a half-brother named Theo, 22, who sent me ridiculous memes within days of meeting me, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I learned I had a grandmother named Iris, tiny and fierce, who looked at me the first time we met and said, "Well, there you are," like I had merely been delayed. And the strangest thing of all, they never asked me for a single thing. No money, no errands, no performance, no role. Lila told me the 3rd time we met, "We kept your place open. We never gave it to anyone else." I sat there in a vinyl booth and didn't know what to do with my hands, because for the first time in my life, I was being wanted by people who got nothing from wanting me. That kind of thing does not feel normal when you've spent your whole life being useful. It feels dangerous. It feels impossible. It feels like you're being offered a room with no job attached to it, and somehow that is scarier than being tolerated. The first time Lila called just to ask how my week was, with no hidden reason behind it, I waited for the catch the entire time. When there wasn't one, I had to pull over because I couldn't see the road clearly. I tested them too. I'm not proud of that, but I did. I canceled plans once to see if they'd punish me. They didn't. They just said, "We'll catch you another time." I offered to pay for things because I didn't know how else to deserve my seat. Iris finally grabbed my cheeks one afternoon, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You are not buying your way into this family. We already decided." Little by little, a knot I'd carried since I was a child started to loosen. Not disappear, just loosen. For the first time, I began to believe that someone could want me in a room without needing anything from me in return. So when my mother called with that fake warmth and invited me to dinner, I already knew where I wanted to spend my evening. I just decided to spend it everywhere at once. Here's who I called. That same night, I called Lila and asked a question I had never dared ask anyone before. "Would you come to my birthday dinner?" I explained the whole thing, my parents, the weird shift, the trust, the feeling that something ugly was coming. I told her I didn't know exactly what they planned to do, but I knew I didn't want to face it alone. She didn't hesitate. "What time? Where?" she asked. Then, after a second, "Should we dress nicely?" Then she said something that made me cover my mouth with my free hand in my kitchen. "We'd be honored to sit there and let you be seen." Then I made one more reservation at Belmere under my own name. Tessa Calder, party of 3, table 8, the hostess told me, the same table number I had noticed weeks earlier, 3 tables behind the front reservation my parents had made. I almost laughed at the symmetry. They had no idea they were arranging my disownment within sight of the people who had spent months teaching me what being wanted felt like. I told Lila and Iris and Theo to arrive a little later than us, order something quiet, and just be there. I wanted to walk to them on my own terms. I won't pretend I didn't want witnesses. I did. I wanted people there who would remember what was said and who was standing where. Because private cruelty always loves to rewrite itself afterward. But for me, they were never just witnesses. They were the difference between being abandoned and being claimed. The folder was how I would show my parents they'd lost. Table 8 was where I'd remember I'd already won. Back at the front table, my mother decided the silence had lasted long enough and pushed one final page toward me. She turned it face up and set a pen on top of it like she was doing me a favor. "It's only an acknowledgement," she said, "that you've been informed, that you understand. Sign it, and we can all behave like civilized people and finish dinner." I looked at the page. I didn't even need to read far. The language was exactly what I expected. A release. A waiver dressed up as an acknowledgement. The kind of thing people slide across a table when they want you to agree you've been warned and you have nothing coming. They wanted my signature while I was still stunned, still wounded, still emotional enough to sign away something important. I'd seen that move before. I'd seen people lose real money at kitchen tables because someone handed them a pen at just the right moment. My mother was counting on the wound. She just didn't know the wound had already been handled. I left the pen where it was. My father kept glancing at my folder. The color had drained from his face in a slow, ugly way, and I could tell the math was starting to scare him. Finally, he asked very carefully, "Tessa, is there something we're missing?" I gave him the first real smile of the night. "Probably," I said. That was when my Aunt Denise arrived in person with Nolan behind her, both of them acting like they just happened to be nearby. The whole thing had the smell of an ambush, and they knew it. "Fancy seeing you here," Denise said, bending down to kiss my cheek in that stiff, performative way she had. My mother had clearly called for backup. She liked having an audience that would nod along and pressure me if I became difficult. Denise pulled up a chair without waiting to be invited. Nolan, now 27, and still dressing like he expected someone else to choose for him, gave me the same look he used to give me as kids, the look that said I belonged somewhere smaller. Denise leaned in first, because subtlety had never been her style. "We all want what's best for the family," she said, laying her hand over my mother's. "Sometimes that means making hard decisions about who really belongs. You've always been practical, Tessa. You understand that blood looks after blood." There it was again, that word, blood, the one she'd been tossing around in the family chat for months, finally spoken out loud at the table it had been built for. And just like that, something inside me loosened. These were not people I was losing. They were people I was putting down. I had carried them far longer than they deserved, and I was finally tired enough to stop. Across from me, my father wasn't speaking. He was staring at his hands. Then, while Denise was still talking, Graham leaned slightly toward me and said in a voice so low it barely carried, "Your grandmother loved you." He stopped there. For one brief second, I saw the version of him who might have done the right thing years earlier, the version who might have chosen hard truth over comfort. His eyes were wet. I believed that part. I believed he loved his mother. I also believed he knew exactly why she had built a trust around me and not around him. That must have been a hard thing to sit with. I waited for more. I really did. There was a version of the night where he apologized, where he told my mother no, where he finally stepped out from behind her. But he looked at her instead, and I watched him choose comfort. He sat back, picked up his water, said nothing. That was the closest thing to love I got from him that night. 4 words and a swallow. I didn't hate him for it. You can't hate someone for being exactly as weak as you always knew they were. But I understood then why my mother had rushed this dinner, why the pressure, why the fake tenderness, why the waver. He knew about Nana's trust. He knew the date was coming. He was trying to get me to sign away whatever he could before I realized the truth. So I asked a question in the same calm voice I use at work when I found the mistake and I'm giving someone the chance to realize it themselves. "Dad," I said, "which document did you actually file under? Your will or Nana's trust?" The table went quiet in a new way. My mother stopped with her glass halfway to her mouth. Denise froze. Graham blinked at me like I'd just switched into another language. In those 8 words, I had told them 3 things they hadn't prepared for. That I knew there was a difference, that I knew which one mattered, and that I had known long enough to learn the language cold. None of them had ever heard me speak like that before. To them, I had always been the easy one, the quiet one, the child who took the smaller slice and kept the room peaceful. They had built this whole night assuming I would absorb the blow and leave quietly. "What are you talking about?" my mother asked, but it came out smaller than she meant it to. I let the question hang there. I've learned that the most powerful person in a room is often the one who doesn't rush to answer. Then I turned my water glass a little on the cloth, lined it up with the edge of my folder, and looked at my father, who had gone pale enough to look sick. He already knew. I could see it. He was silently asking me not to open the folder. So I opened it. No dramatic flourish, no slam, no speech. I just turned it toward them and laid the 3 pages flat on the table. The retainer letter first, with the law office heading and the unmistakable proof that I had counsel. The trust schedule next, with the key paragraph visible in black and white. And last, my original birth certificate, with Lila Hart's name on the mother line. I didn't point. I didn't need to. Paper does the work on its own. My mother's eyes went straight to the trust schedule, because of course they did. Some part of her had always known where the real money lived. I watched her read. The caregiver distributions to Graham and Marlene Calder shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 28th birthday, whereupon the remainder shall pass to my granddaughter, Tessa. I saw her eyes catch on remainder, then on Tessa, then on the meaning of both together. The color left her face. She looked up at me, then at Graham, then back at the page like maybe the second reading would be kinder than the first. It wasn't. I spoke gently because now I could. "You filed against the wrong family," I said. "The one you tried to cut me out of was the smaller one." My mother was fast, I'll give her that. It still took her about 10 seconds to put the whole thing together. The house on Larkspur Lane, funded by Nana's trust, the payments that had quietly supported their comfortable life, the exact day those payments stopped, the waiver I almost signed, which would have been useless because it only released a claim against their will, not the trust itself. They had spent all their energy aiming at the wrong paper. The cruelty had been free. The mistake had been expensive. And just like that, I learned one more thing about people like my mother. They don't apologize when caught. They pivot. Her expression changed first. The cold drained out of her face, and suddenly she looked warm and devastated and motherly in a way she had never looked when it cost her anything. Then she reached for my hand. "Tessa," she said softly, like she was talking us both back from a fire. "None of this changes what we are. We're still your parents. We're family." Family. The same woman who had just said she kept me for the benefits was now trying to wrap herself in the word family like it had always meant love. I looked at her hand. I did not take it. People expect this to be the part where I humiliated them back, where I announced the exact amount in the trust, where I made a scene and let them sit there with the check. I understand why people want that version. I've wanted it too. But I work with money for a living, and I know this truth better than most. Power isn't the biggest number in the room. It's not needing the number at all. I had a career I built myself. I had savings. I had a life that existed before that trust money ever hit my hands. I didn't need the inheritance to be free. And that was the one thing my mother could not survive understanding. So I closed the folder, gathered the pages back inside, and set the pen neatly beside her plate. I had already won the thing they thought we were fighting over before they even sat down. There was nothing left to argue about. Only one choice remained: where I wanted to spend the rest of my birthday. And I had already made that choice 5 months earlier in a diner booth when a nervous woman with my chin slid a photo album across the table and asked me for nothing. I handle estates every day, and I can tell you what I tell clients all the time. If somebody only shows up when there's something to gain, that tells you exactly what they are. Shared history doesn't turn that into love. If that hits close to home, leave a comment. I'd love to know I'm not the only one who had to learn that the hard way. And if you want more stories like this, stay with me. I stood up. Just a normal rise from a chair, nothing dramatic, but it changed the whole atmosphere at the table. My mother's hand was still hanging in the air where mine should have been. "Sit down," she snapped, and the soft mask was gone now. The old control came back hard. "Sit down, Tessa. Where do you think you're going?" Denise straightened in her chair. Nolan stopped smirking for once. My father just looked exhausted, like a man watching the last decent thing in his life walk away. I picked up the folder and held it against my chest. Then I looked at my mother, the woman who had spent 28 years trying to make me believe I had no real place anywhere. And I told her the simplest truth I had. My real family is sitting 3 tables behind you. I didn't say it loudly. I didn't need to. The sentence had been true the entire night. True while she smiled. True while she rehearsed. True while she slid the waiver across the cloth. She had thought she was humiliating me in front of strangers. She had actually been doing it within arm's reach of the people who had spent months saving me a seat. I watched the words land, and then I watched my mother slowly turn around in her chair. The kind of turning you do when some part of you already knows and is praying the rest of you is wrong. Her shoulders moved first, then her face. And there, at table 8, were Lila, Iris, and Theo. They had been there the whole time, quiet, calm, eating almost nothing, watching everything. Lila met my mother's eyes first. She didn't glare, she didn't smirk. She just looked at the woman who had raised her daughter on 1 candle and a calculator. And then her face softened when she looked back at me. Iris had already folded her napkin and set it beside her plate like she'd been ready for this moment an hour ago. Theo had stopped pretending to check his phone. My mother's eyes moved from Lila's face to mine and back again, as if doing some desperate resemblance math she didn't want to finish. And then I saw the exact moment she understood. The family she had just told me I didn't have was sitting 15 feet behind her in real chairs at a real table. She turned back to me. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in my entire life, she had no script. And in that silence, a chair scraped at table 8. They stood up, all 3 of them. Not to start a scene, not to fight. Just to be standing when I reached them, the way people stand when someone comes through a door after a long flight. Iris stood first, because of course she did. Then Lila, and then Theo, who nearly knocked into the table with his knee as he got up too fast. They didn't say a word to my parents. They didn't have to. The fact that they stood was enough. The restaurant had gone quiet around us in that specific way strangers do when they realize something real is happening and stop pretending not to watch. A server froze with a tray halfway to another table. I walked past my mother, who was still half turned in her chair, past Denise, who had finally gone silent, past my father, who lifted his eyes to me for 1 second and then dropped them again. 15 feet, 3 tables, 28 years. When I reached table 8, Iris took my face in both hands the same way Nana used to. Lila pulled out the open chair beside hers, the 4th chair, the one they had asked the host to add, even though their reservation had only been for 3. And then she said the words she had written in that first letter. "We kept a place for you," she said softly. "We always did." I sat down, right there in the seat that had been waiting for me all my life. That was when my mother lost the only thing she had ever protected in public, her composure. I heard her chair scrape behind me, heard her stand up, heard her voice break the polished quiet she'd worn all evening. "After everything we paid for," she said, and it wasn't soft anymore, it carried. "After everything we did, the schools, the house, the years, you do this to us in public? You humiliate your own family over money?" People were staring now, not politely, openly. Denise grabbed for her sleeve and hissed, "Mylene, sit down. Everyone's watching." But my mother was past being managed. For the first time in her life, she had lost control in front of people who didn't belong to her script. "We gave you everything," she said to the room at large. And even then, I noticed she said gave, not loved, because even cornered, the word love never made it into her vocabulary. I stayed seated beside Lila. Her hand found mine under the table and stayed there. I let my mother be loud. The louder she got, the clearer the picture became. Every person in that room could see it. A young woman sitting calmly with people who clearly adored her. An older woman shouting about what she paid for. And there is not a soul alive who hears a parent screaming about money and thinks, "Yes, that's the loving one." My father never stood. He just put his face in his hands. I let my mother run out of air the way storms run out of rain. When the room finally settled again, I stood one more time, walked back to the front table, and placed a single page in front of her face up. The trust distribution schedule. I didn't need it anymore. My attorney had the originals. I just wanted her to have something to read on the longest night of her life. "You can keep that copy," I said. "You'll want to understand what ended tonight and what didn't." She stared at it. Graham reached for it and then stopped himself. Then I looked at both of them, my mother, who had priced me at one cupcake, and my father, who had loved his mother just enough to know she had trusted me more than him. And I said the one sentence I had already decided on before I walked into that restaurant. "You kept me for the benefits." Then I turned and walked back to table 8. I never looked behind me again. Not when Denise called my name. Not when my mother said something I didn't catch. Not even when my father finally made a sound that might have been my name. I sat back down beside Lila. Iris had ordered me a slice of chocolate cake while I was gone, and Theo had stuck a little candle in it. One candle, lit. For 1 second, the symmetry of that almost made me laugh and cry at the same time. Then Lila leaned over and said, "Make the wish." And I realized I didn't have one, because I already had it. The trust did exactly what Nana built it to do. On my 28th birthday, the caregiver distributions to Graham and Marlene Calder ended by the exact terms Nana had signed years earlier. The remainder transferred to me through the trustee, untouched by the will my parents had wasted money trying to rewrite. You can't cut someone out of a trust you don't control. Their unsigned waiver turned out to be worth exactly what it deserved. Within a year, my parents sold the house on Larkspur Lane because they couldn't afford it without the trust payments and moved somewhere smaller. I heard Denise was furious when she found out none of Nana's money was going to Nolan either. The story of that dinner moved through the family exactly the way these things do, quietly at first, then everywhere. And the version where Marlene Calder was the devoted mother, betrayed by an ungrateful adopted daughter, never really stuck, because too many strangers at Belmere had watched a woman scream about what she paid for, while a quiet girl sat with the family across the room that had actually wanted her. I didn't sue anybody. I didn't post online. I didn't make a scene after that night. I just stopped answering. That was enough. A boundary held in silence is still a boundary. A few weeks later, my father sent me one text, 3 words, "I'm sorry." No excuse, no follow-up, no name signed to it. I didn't reply. I never did. I heard later that Denise tried to rally everyone to challenge Nana's trust, but Graham shut it down. He told them their mother had every right to leave her money where she wanted, that it had been hers, and it was over. He was right. He was also, as always, too late and speaking in the wrong room, when it cost him nothing and changed nothing. That was my father in the end, a man who knew the right thing and could only say it after saying it wouldn't hurt anybody anymore. I didn't need the apology. but I was glad he finally said something honest out loud. As for me, I spent that first real birthday eating cake at table 8 with people who got nothing out of wanting me. And I've spent every birthday since with them. Lila and I talk every Sunday at 5 o'clock now, the time I used to keep for Nana. Iris taught me how to make proper toast exactly the way Nana liked it. Theo still sends ridiculous memes. And somewhere in a drawer in my kitchen, there's a photo album that doesn't close properly anymore because it finally has enough pictures in it. Being useful was the only thing my parents ever wanted from me. Being wanted was the thing I had never known. And it took me 28 years and one terrible dinner to learn this. Anyone who only keeps you for the benefits was never loving you in the first place. They were just counting what you could produce. That's my story. One candle for 27 years. And on the 28th, a whole table lit them all without being asked. If someone in your life only values you when you're useful, let this be your sign to stop auditioning for a seat you already deserve. You do not have to earn the people who truly love you. Share this with someone who needs to hear that. Leave a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.